Arg! Yes. which is now part of this said pod. Good good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're listening to this. Welcome to another EverybodyHatesCleveland.com, the podcast. I am the Godzilla of podcasting, joined by my hairy King Kong, Mike Hattery. Michael, that was right off the cuff, man. You got to give me credit.
It was quite good. It was quite good. What titles have we selected this week?
I don't know. I want to be the executive of I got nothing. I feel kind of like Ben Carson at any sort of speaking engagement where there are other candidates. Which means I've got to tone it down a little bit and not really say a whole lot. Anyways, let's get off the political schneid. Of course, we're here to talk about Cleveland Indians positional previews, and as timing would have it, Mike, it just so happens we're on the outfield. And it couldn't be any more applicable, being that there was probably some chaos theory prior to yesterday. But with the news of Abraham Almonte going on the 80-game suspension list, I don't know that throws it any more into chaos, but there is one less body in the outfield. Initial thoughts?
Yeah, I think the really bad thing is depth. I don't think that Almonte is like by any means a really significant leap above his potential replacement, especially if it's Naquin. I think Almonte had upside, and it's frustrating. I think the biggest thing is, I think it really shrinks their depth. I think you're going from, I think the guy after Naquin or maybe Davis, or whoever you plug and chug in center, the guys after them aren't that substantive. We're talking about, James Ramsey is pulling himself back into sort of the outside, moving almost
just the way we want him to get the position by everybody else just going away,
just dying. Ultimately, it's like sort of when you have the flag carrier in the Civil War and he dies like 12 times, and at the end you have like a 12-year-old boy carrying the flag. You just don't want that to happen, and that's kind of the James Ramsey story. Ultimately.
Well, I mean, the Indians outfield as of now. I mean, the funny thing here is, Mike, prior to all of this, really the chaos piece to all this was Michael Brantley's injury. Even with Brantley in the equation, we were looking at a Brantley, Almonte, Lonnie Chisenhall outfield, and even the most ardent of Lonnie Chisenhall fans, and I don't know that I would throw you in the ardent category, but you certainly, I would say, favor Chisenhall maybe more than, well, not maybe, you definitely favor him more than, but even the most ardent of Chisenhall fans has to say he's a wild card based on body of work. So with Brantley in the equation, there seems to be a kind of a chaos theory prevalent. Now, without Almonte, last year's center field starter at the end of the year, who may have been good based solely upon the fact that he wasn't Michael Bourne, now we're looking at, as I've been kind of mentioning on Twitter and in other podcasts, Lonnie Chisenhall is the anchor, well, unless you make a case for Rajai Davis, who's never played in the outfield for the Indians and is 36. It's hard to figure out a place to start. I mean, we really have to right now start this conversation with Lonnie Chisenhall in right field. And if this isn't me being snarky with Lonnie Chisenhall, and I know I've got that persona on Twitter, but in reality, if Lonnie Chisenhall's your anchor, the guy you're depending on, that's all kinds of trouble to me, based upon the fact that Chisenhall, when having to anchor positions in the past, when having to take over third base, doesn't seem to be able to handle that type of pressure very well. And now he's playing a position that he's played all of 2 months.
Yeah, there are a lot of obscenities that are pretty useful in discussing the Indians outfield situation right now. I will attempt to avoid them. I guess here's my deal. The Indians outfield doesn't need to be good. The Indians outfield needs to be competent enough to allow an elite rotation and a really good infield unit to carry the team. They have to not hurt the team. They have to not be bad. And that's the sort of baseline that we have to look at the outfield, because we have our studs in the infield. We have Lindor, we have Kipnis, we have Gomes, and we have Santana and Napoli offensively. But we have, 3 studs in Gomes, Kipnis, and Lindor. So we have our studs, position players. We just need the outfield to produce a couple league average positions so it doesn't hurt us. But that is looking harder and harder to do every day.
Well,
I
that's
guess
the key.
Chisenhall.
That's the key to me is that term every day, because I don't think anybody has a problem with Rajai Davis being a fourth outfielder. I honestly don't think anybody has a problem with Almonte being in center field prior to the 80-game suspension, based simply on the fact that when Brantley comes back, there are guys. Brantley can play center, Rajai Davis can play center, and if you're to believe some people on Twitter, Chisenhall can play center, but that's for another day and another time. But you've got Cowgill backing up all these guys, possibly Cowgill, some other names that we'll get into in a second. But that's the key, Mike, is every day. I think we almost have kind of the Mike Aviles thing going on right now with the outfield, where we have Mike Aviles in last year in roles that sucked and made him not a guy that baseball fans liked, because he really wasn't good in the role that he was given. Now we've got Rajai Davis having to play every day. We have Lonnie Chisenhall having to be, like I said, the anchor almost and right. And we have this, I don't know, potpourri of other guys that are going to try to platoon or fill in the holes. And we'll get into all those guys, including, you mentioned Naquin, guys like Cowgill, and I forgetting off the top of my head, a guy from Tampa. We've got a whole slew of other guys, of non-roster guys that they've signed. I don't know, Mike. I mean, this feels like the Aviles outfield without actually Aviles playing out there. And we'll get into Jose Ramirez too, but even putting a guy like Jose Ramirez out there, bringing up a guy like Zach Walters, bringing up a guy like James Ramsey. I mean, is there any way until Brantley comes back, and even after Brantley comes back, if they don't make a move for this outfield to garner any sort of consistency where we can just say the term league average and not smirk and snicker?
First, to your first point, I know you, Jim, you and I have talked about this a lot. I've talked about it with Jeff Namna and Adam Burke. The really scary thing about this outfield to me, I think Francona does some really good things, but I think a big problem is that sometimes you need to Tito-proof a roster, which is you have to eliminate his ability to tinker, because tinkering gets Francona in a lot of trouble, and it's one of the reasons why Aviles has gotten a bad rap. It's not his fault. He was just, you noted he was overused, but I think this outfield is one where we're going to have 5 outfielders. We're going to have a manager who's really dangerous at tinkering, constantly tinkering. I do not, I don't know how to have a positive mindset on this. I guess here's my best case. If Brantley is gone for a month, you're fine. Maybe 2 weeks, even better. Brantley having a fringe MVP candidate in left kind of gives you the ballast to carry the other two positions. I think right field, I think Chisenhall hits right-handed pitching well enough, which is the bigger part of the platoon, and plays good enough defense that he's going to be pretty close to league average. So then you have to kind of glue center field together, and I'm not sure how that's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. I'd much prefer it happens with Naquin and Rajai Davis. And then Davis, I think you're going to see Davis and Cowgill paired with the center fielder and the right fielder in platoons. And Francona just needs to give up on the 8-man bullpen because it doesn't make sense with this roster. He can't do it. And it doesn't, there are a bunch of really dumb reasons why it doesn't make sense. But that I just don't feel like we need to talk about. But I think you can build some. I think Chisenhall, I trust his defense enough to say that it's above average. And I think he hits right-handed pitching enough to say that he can play 135 games and be good enough. You're going to hide him against Chris Sale, but you'd hide almost any left-handed hitter against Chris Sale. It's not very fair.
I think the right term there is you just hide from Chris Sale. If they could all just sit in the dugout and just let him throw pitches, I think I'd be okay with that.
Certainly. So that's where we are. I'm comfortable. Brantley's the big key. If Brantley's healthy for 140 games this year, and Chisenhall does what he did last year, kind of pretty mediocre offense but good defense, those two positions are fine. So all you have to do is find a way to duct tape center field into 2 wins above replacement. And I think they can find a way to do that. I think they have enough bodies to sort of throw something together And the other really positive thing about center is that they don't have any sort of substantive financial commitment to anybody that's going to bind them into making bad decisions. I think they have Venable, they have Naquin, they have Davis, they have Cowgill, and you can mix and match until you get production.
All right, so let's preface all of this as we dive into left, center, and right one at a time. Let's preface all this by saying we may part two this, because I don't know that when we're going to talk about all the parts. They signed Will Venable, yesterday. We've already mentioned Cowgill, who they made a move for earlier this year. Of course, James Ramsey is a guy that we'll be talking about. Joey Butler, the guy from the Rays that I was thinking about. Michael Choice is a guy that they've picked up. Robbie Grossman is a guy that they've picked up. Shane Robinson is a guy that they've picked up. Of course, Zach Walters, I think I've already mentioned him. But we've got all of these names. But let's start with the name before we get to all of these bits and pieces. My big concern here, Mike, is Michael Brantley, and not the injury. He's injured. Players get injured all the time. My concern is that now he's thinking, I need to get back too early. We learned last year with our Yan Gomes situation that coming back too early with one of our primary pieces is a massive, massive mistake. Last year, though, we were lucky enough to have Roberto Perez backing up Yan Gomes. Obviously, we don't have that luxury in the outfield unless Tyler Naquin turns into some sort of wonderkind and steals the job, and we're going to get into that, I'm sure. Are you afraid that Francona could allow a situation where Brantley hustles his way back into the lineup on opening day? He's already been stating, I could be back by opening day, which freaks me out a little bit. Might this be the reason why we should be even more freaked out by Brantley coming back too soon and perhaps screwing up his entire season?
Yeah, that's scary. I think one of the really positive things is you've heard the Indians say multiple times that Brantley's goals sort of aren't realistic, and not realistic in the sense that he could be on the field, because he certainly could be on the field.
Pre Almonte, my friend. That was pre Almonte.
This is fair. I for some reason, I think they understand that they have to be patient with Brantley. On the other hand, it's not totally outside the realm of sort of the outcomes for this surgery. It happened during the off season. He can wean his way in, and to me, he doesn't. I guess if he can DH a little bit.
I was just going to hashtag DH. Yeah, you're right.
And it's spring, so hopefully you get the sort of the game load is lighter in April, so you can rest the guy who's hurt. You have more off days early in the season. Hopefully you get a rain out or a snow out or two. So I think they can protect him enough where, even if he comes back like April 20th, he's going to miss 10 games. The Indians can get by 10 games without Michael Brantley and give him an extra 20 days. I think that they can protect him, or maybe he misses 15 early, but they can sort of get an extra month out of that issue without really costing themselves too much. So I think that it's going to be okay in terms of Brantley. But, the season, there is no team in the American League that can lose their second or third best player and contend for a playoff spot. He needs to be there for 135 plus games this year. So they have to find a way to bring him along at the right pace.
Well, great. So we can assume he's not going to be their opening day. So let's look at the left field replacements. You have to think that Davis is probably the guy there most of the time. But of course, they do sign Venable, who is a guy. It hasn't really been talked about a lot, but he's a guy that they mentioned at the deadline last year, not only the July deadline, but the August deadline. You've got Venable just signed. You got to think that they like him. Of course, they make the move to get Cowgill. He's going to be in the mix in left and center, as is Venable. I guess we might as well just talk about center as well. Do you see Rajai Davis in center? Do you see him in left? Do you see him both? Like, is this going to be one of those things where they piecemeal, as you mentioned earlier, they piecemeal between guys like Davis and like Venable? Or do you think that they give a guy a position and then shuffle in perhaps a utility guy like Jose Ramirez? And I do want to get into Ramirez all by himself, but might they just be figuring we're going to supplement Ramirez? It's hard to say without seeing any games played, but we're going to give Rajai Davis center. We're going to give Venable left. We're going to give Joey Butler left. Do you see a platoon? Do you see someone getting the position? Do you see shuffling? Do you see Ramirez playing a bit part? Like, where do you see this going in left and center?
Yeah, I think it's right that we discuss them together because there's so much intersectionality. Gosh,
and of course, I didn't even Naquin. I didn't even say Naquin. You got to figure if he's up, he's playing center field.
Yeah. So betting on any 34 to 36-year-old to play good center field defense is just not a thing that I really like doing. I'm not going to lie. I don't like doing that with Davis or Venable. I think both of them are kind of past their time in terms of being able to defend center. Here's the really positive thing for the Indians. All their pitchers except Bauer get more ground balls than they get fly balls. And they have probably the best swing and miss rotation in baseball. So there are a significantly smaller number of balls in play. So you can kind of hide a little bit with some crappy center field play, especially early in the season. When it's cold, the ball doesn't fly as well. You can hide a little bit, but Davis, to me, I think they just give him left. And I think that they use Cowgill as a rover in center and in right. And I think Venable is paired with Davis in left, I would bet. And I think that, to me, Naquin has to make this team. He is the most upside, I think, of the guys we have floating in terms of Robbie Grossman, Michael Choice, Cowgill. I think Naquin's the most likely to be a decent, competent starter in center, especially when covered on his bad platoon side. So I'd go Naquin in center, and then I'd go Davis in left, and then let Cowgill float in between center and right, and Venable pair with Davis in left.
Well, and there. So here's where things get interesting, because you in a piece earlier this year, Mike, mentioned Naquin, and former IBI compadre of ours, Jeff Ellis, has said he's heard from people in the know that Naquin, prior to all of this mess, was getting consideration to play center. Now that Almonte's out of the picture, and you have to think that he may be out of the picture, period. If Naquin gets the job, basically our job is done there. I could see a platoon or him failing. And again, I know there are some people on the interwebs that don't like hearing that, but there's definitive question. And you mentioned some of that question in your piece with regards to Naquin, but if he gets the job, then he's pretty much going to be center field this year, don't you think? This is a conversation that has nothing to do with Almonte, but, they're not going to bring Naquin up and have him the fourth guy, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you're right. I think if he plays center, he's going to be the dude. I think he'll be covered occasionally. I think he'll sit some left-handed pitchers, but he's going to be the dude if he gets called up. I also want to point to two things with Naquin and the likelihood of him playing center field. We have Bastian, who at times, not that he isn't someone who will, not that he isn't sort of someone who's willing to write things that are tough on the Indians, but he's someone who many times is sort of the voice of the Indians. And when he says the Indians are going to give Naquin a really significant look and talks up Naquin playing center, and when you see Terry Pluto talks about the Indians giving Naquin really strong looks in center, I think we have a pretty strong picture that Naquin probably, it's his job to lose regarding center field this spring.
So, looking at it that way, let's say we give Naquin, would you say he's the favorite right now then?
I would say he's the favorite. I'd put 65% he's the starting center fielder. I think there's room to move if he struggles. But I would say that he's over 50% likelihood of being the starting center fielder.
So perhaps, Mike, while we start in distress, if we look at an outfield with Rajai Davis in left, Tyler Naquin in center, Lonnie Chisenhall in right, assuming we can get league average play out of all three, or a balance, counterbalance of league average with some peppering of what I'm going to assume are two utility guys or one utility guy and a super utility guy, and we'll get to that in a second. my assumption here is that maybe the stress level isn't that high, assuming, of course, that Brantley is back, we'll say by the end of April, right? I mean, it could, discounting the fact that the Indians have sucked in April under the tutelage of Tito Francona, if the team somehow rebounds from that persona this year, and the outfield could be league out. We could be okay.
I think so. I think they can cover for a short enough time. And I think the most alarming thing is that, if Naquin or Davis gets hurt, then we can start going crazy because the depth is really so thin. But Almonte to Naquin, I think, is a lot smaller than we think. So I think that we were freaking out a month ago, and we're freaking out a little more now. And I'm not so sure it's that different than a month ago. And certainly, I would have loved the Indians to have dressed center field. But I think you can get one. I think you can. I don't think Naquin's going to kill you. I don't think Chisenhall's going to kill you. I think they're going to be competent. I don't think Naquin's exactly a star, but I think he can be something decent for a little while.
Okay, so I mean, I think the funny thing is, Mike, is prior to Almonte going on the 80-day suspension list, I think that the fun conversation would have been this question: who do you start, Almonte or Naquin? And I'm 90% sure I would have said Naquin anyways.
Yeah, there were some really positive things with Almonte last year, but I kind of buy into certain things with Naquin more. I think he can really crush righties. And I know that I'm just getting really positive because I can sell myself into almost anything with the Indians. But I think that, he's going to crush righties. He can defend okay.
Yeah. Well, I think both are in the same category. I mean, you have Almonte, who used to be a prospect of some, people liked him. I mean, he's never performed. He's had some issues with sobriety and stuff like that over the years, which makes this 80-game suspension for PEDs a little distressing on a personal level. But, I think the questions with Almonte was last year a combination of not born disease and, him just playing a little bit better than he has in the past because someone gave him a chance. And then you have Naquin, who was a number one pick and has kind of, I don't want to say struggled through the minor league system, but certainly hasn't been held back in the same way that Lindor has been held back, just hasn't really developed the way they wanted and then got hurt. I mean, both are kind of in the same basket. And when you're dealing with players in the outfield in the same basket, you always have to go with upside, right? I mean, you want to give the job to a guy who could be better. And I think, just from a layman's look, and we know a little bit more about Naquin than most people, but even if we're not, minor league, geeks like we are, just looking at the two, you have to say Naquin's got more upside, right?
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things, you've obviously seen Naquin's defense more than 90% of the people who are going to talk about Tyler Naquin over the next month. So I'll lean on you. And I know I've quoted you in the past as saying something around, he's not going to surprise you. You don't notice him. I think you don't notice him was something that I found interesting. And I think that means he's probably just competent out there. But you can talk about that. But to me, the bat is interesting. He's kind of reduced his strikeouts through the system, and he makes really good contact. We have really good contact quality data from him to the point where he can hit. I mean, I think he can hit a little bit.
IQ.
Jim thinks he's also smart. He thinks
well, you know how I geek out over guys who improve in the minor league system. I think improving from level to level is really hard to do. And he has utilized both levels of the minor leagues, and he's utilized winter ball to improve his game. And we've seen that almost, in a ladder-like fashion. He's moved up the system and shown some sort of improvement offensively every year. I mean, whether it be power, whether it be gaps, whether it be I'd be curious. I'll be really curious to see if they start measuring exit velocity. He has improved. Everything I've heard when he was in Carolina, he wasn't noticeable. I mean, I'll just put it to you that way. We've had better defenders in the outfield. We've had arms as good as his, and people can argue with me all they want. Trust me, 16 years watching Carolina baseball, I've seen better defenders, much better defenders than him. better all-around package defenders. However, we're talking players who have leveled off and who haven't had a stick or have gotten worse as they've gone up. He has not done that.
Yeah, he trimmed his strikeout rate when he moved from A ball to double A, which is something that I always get really excited about. And his walk rates have improved as he's climbed up the ladder and faced better quality of pitching. And his BABIPs are awesome because, he hits the ball really hard. I think there are a lot of positive signs. I think we talked about Ursula, and, we can go around on this, but I think that, to me, if I look at important minor league indicators, it's a guy who can improve his play discipline, who can limit his Ks climbing up the minor league ladder. And it's someone who shows me really good BABIPs. And I'm going to be really positive. And Naquin's done that. Naquin's given me sort of optimism looking at his sort of climb through the system that I think he can do something offensively. I don't think he can be great, but he could be league average offensively. And league average offensively when you're playing center field is really valuable.
All right. So, Naquin is definitively a possibility. We'll give him the favorite. I think, talking about the Venables and the Cowgills are just that. It's possible, Mike. And talking about these guys may be senseless because it's distinctly possible that at the end of all this, they just understand they need a guy to get them to Brantley. Could the Indians just have, Lonnie Chisenhall syndrome in the spring and have some guy just shredding spring training pitching, and they just keep him, that a non-roster guy based solely upon the fact that he's hitting well, hoping that they can keep him hot until Brantley comes back? I mean, could we just be senselessly talking about this and, Venables hitting like 480 heading into April, and they just keep him because of it?
I think so. I mean, I think that they could just kind of hot hand center. And I think that they could be pretty aggressive early in terms of rotating bodies in center. I think they could run Venable out there for 2 weeks, realize he can't play it anymore, and run Naquin right up. I think it's very possible that for like into mid-April, we don't really have a center fielder that we think will last very long. So I definitely think that's a possibility. I also think that one of the really interesting things is how Zimmer feels in terms of being comfortable in Major League camp. I'm not saying he's starting the season with the Indians, but I think if they feel really confident in him and think he can be ready by June or July, I think that'll be really interesting in terms of how they address center field and whether they address it through trade. I also think Tampa Bay has like 6 outfielders. I think Desmond Jennings is going to be on the market at the end of spring training. I think the Cubs are going to have an outfielder floating around at the end of spring training. So I'm not, I know the Indians probably aren't going to go sign Austin Jackson, but I'm not resigned to the fact that any of these guys is absolutely the starter.
Right. Well, and kind of where I was going next with this, and actually we'll hold off on the trade stuff. I'll get into that in a second, but Jose Ramirez was playing in the outfield, irregardless, likely a left field candidate. They plowed Mike Aviles into center last year. You have to believe that Jose Ramirez, regardless of all this, was going to probably see a game or two in center. It's not outlandish to think that Jose Ramirez could see 20, 25 games in the outfield this year, especially now with the question marks, right? I mean, if things shake out, Brantley comes back and you have an outfield of Brantley, Naquin / Cowgill, and Chisenhall as your outfielders, it's distinctly possible, even with that solidified, that Jose Ramirez is going to be out there 20 to 25 games, right? And obviously, if we're going to compare him to his predecessor, it's probably going to look at least a little bit better, right?
Certainly. I do think that there's something to J-Ram. So we talked about this off air. I think that the Indians knew for a couple of days with Almonte, and the J-Ram playing center field or left field thing is like something we've discussed, something that became publicly known in the last 3 or 4 days, or publicly discussed. Also, when J-Ram was playing winter ball, the Indians had no conversation with his winter ball team about him playing outfield. I think the J-Ram playing outfield thing is kind of like it's a relatively new thing. Like I think that I think that they may have known with Almonte for more than just yesterday, and I think that Ramirez might, his possible shift to the outfield might have had something to do with that. I think he could play a lot of left. I know I've heard people say he could be Billy Hamilton in center, which I kind of find ridiculous.
Actually, what I've heard is better than Billy Hamilton, but I'll just leave it at that.
I think that we really, I think we've seen Chisenhall, who transferred really well to right, and that's awesome. That's great. But I don't think we realize how hard it is to play the outfield in terms of reading fly balls and line drives. Shin-Soo Choo is probably one of the best athletes who's played outfield for the Indians for the last 5 to 10 years, and he was a wretched defender. That guy just never ran a clean route ever, and he really struggled with balls off the bat. And so him kind of as a lesson to me, I don't think just because you move a really athletic guy to the outfield that he's necessarily going to be a really good defender. I think he could be, and I'd say that the odds are decent that he could be a plus, above average defender. But acting like there's some certainty that Jose Ramirez can play like average to above average center field is kind of foolish, and I don't really care to do it.
Well, the name it always comes up when you hear about an infielder going to the outfield, and I think I've heard it. Someone wrote about this, and I've written. When we were talking about Kipnis a few years back, potentially moving to the outfield, I think I mentioned this guy too. But I think Robin Yount's always going to be the litmus for an infielder being excessively athletic, moving to the outfield. Now, of course, Robin Yount is the exception, not the rule. You're talking about a guy who won MVP at shortstop and then went to center field and won an MVP as a center fielder. That's certainly the rarity, but and he was a lot bigger guy, of course, than Jose Ramirez, and size doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to be, 6'1", 230 to be a good outfielder. But certainly, Ramirez doesn't fit the role to me of an everyday outfielder. He doesn't, he's a little spark plug. Don't get me wrong, but I don't see the same type of player. And I honestly, as much as I love J-Ram, and I don't know that there's a bigger J-Ram fan on the planet other than the two people talking right now. I honestly don't see regular outfielder there for Jose Ramirez.
Yeah, Ramirez has really, I think Ramirez has pretty good burst. I think he has a pretty good first step. But I think your first step in the outfield is more determined on your instincts in terms of reading the ball off the bat. So I think it can mute his first step. And I don't really know what his closing speed looks like. I think he gets a lot of his advantage in the infield based on his first step and his instincts. And I'm not sure how that's going to translate to the outfield.
Well, I think that's exactly why he's better at second base, where the first step, I'm not saying the first step's not important at shortstop, but, of course, you've got to have a little bit of closing speed there, especially when you're covering gaps. Second base, you're playing a little bit deeper, and first step is massively important. You see Jason Kipnis doing that a lot, reading the ball well off the bat. It's not necessarily the closing speed for him. It's that first step. He seems to get good first steps. Ramirez follows in that. Now, listen, he's fast. So perhaps, we need to see him out there first, but, he is an intriguing possibility, and Mike Aviles, he is not. So we do have some intriguing candidates, Mike, as we talked about, and I don't really want to talk a lot about Venable and Cowgill, so we won't. I've been pounding the internet about Marcell Ozuna for the past 7 months, and now it seems kind of past. It seems as though the Marlins are just going with him. I've seen his name pop up on Twitter again a couple of times. Does he become another option? You mentioned some possibilities with the Rays, the Cubs. Couldn't Ozuna be back on the radar for the Indians? We know they've had discussions. Do they covet their starting pitching too much that they don't want to mess with it? Obviously, that's where the Marlins will be knocking on the door if such a deal were to take place. Could Ozuna be on the radar again, or are the Indians done with that? Because remember, if they get Ozuna's not a one-year deal. Ozuna is the kind of guy who's going to be around forever. And you did mention Zimmer as being a possibility. And, of course, next year you start thinking about Ramsey as well. Do they want to stay away from a long-term guy like Ozuna and keep the pitching? Or now that Almonte's gone, could the Indians be now maybe on the phone at least with Florida saying, what could we do here?
Yeah, a couple of things. I don't think Ozuna has ever been off the market. I think the Marlins have just realized that they're probably going to have to start the season with him. I think we saw the Marlins act like he was off the market, and then it was leaked that they were giving teams ultimatums of players they would take for Marcell Ozuna. So I don't think Ozuna's ever been off the market. I think he's right there. I'm curious what he'd cost. I would be shocked if he cost more than Trevor Bauer. And I know that, I think there's some disagreement over whether Bauer and Ozuna would be a fair trade. To me, Bauer, with our depth, would be a fair trade. He gives the Marlins the sort of stuff upside to gamble on and some production. And the Indians get their outfielder and lose a little pitching depth, but have probably the most pitching depth in the AL where they can hide it. So to me, I think that deal's a possibility still. I don't think he's ever been off the table for the Marlins. I think the Indians surely have the assets to do it without even really altering their major league roster very much. So I hope so.
Well, I mean, look at Ozuna this way. To me, he's always the perfect candidate for the Indians. He's tied to the team at least through 2019 if they do get him. And he is a guy, I think, who projects well into any of the three outfield positions. Say there's a day where they do move Brantley somewhere else to DH or something like that. He could be a guy that projects to left. To me, seems to be the perfect type of right fielder. He has a pretty good arm and can cover and does have power that would fit the corners. Of course, that would, heaven forbid, dislodge Lonnie Chisenhall, but that's not really the avenue I want to go down right now, because I could certainly slide down that slippery slope. All right, let's get down to business as we kind of wrap things up here, Mike. If you were a betting man come opening day, who's your starting outfield?
Gosh. Well, I think, unfortunately, that's going to be really based on who they're facing the Red Sox. Right. So their opening day outfield is going to be, I think David Price is going to be the opening day starter. So I need to think of, I would say that probably Colin Cowgill and Rajai Davis are going to be in the lineup. Or maybe Naquin gets the start because it's opening day. So I'd say either Davis, Naquin, Chisenhall, or Davis, Cowgill, Chisenhall.
Well, there you go. So now you got me worrying again, but that's neither here nor there. We haven't talked about Lonnie Chisenhall. At the end of the day, is Lonnie Chisenhall without the injuries in the outfield, with the injuries in the outfield? I know that you're a big fan of Lonnie's. I don't know if I'm overplaying that. I think whenever I think of Lonnie Chisenhall and you, I think of the other side of the teeter-totter, like we're in the playground and you're on the other side of the teeter-totter. I apologize for that. I'm not sure that that's truly the accurate assessment of this, but you think that he's going to be the regular guy in right. They're not going to platoon Lonnie, right? He's going to be the regular right fielder, period, end of story, unless he Lonnie's, as I like to call it.
Yeah, and I think I do want to note that I am not a huge... I don't think Chisenhall's ever going to be like a better than league average player. But the Indians
are you trying to tell me, Mike, that my analogy of you sitting on the other side of the teeter-totter with me isn't good? Because I kind of like that analogy. It kind of fits.
I'm sitting not really on the other side. I'm halfway on the other side. I'm not on the other end. So the balance is all off. You're just sitting on the ground.
Well, I think that describes the outfield pretty well, but that's neither here nor there.
But right. Chiz, Chiz is gonna be fine. He's gonna play good defense, and he's gonna be mercurial as hell, and he's gonna hit really well for 2 months, and he's gonna suck for 2 months. And you hope those 2 good months come early so we can bury Brantley. And truthfully, having a guy who has sort of a lot of variance, but has a really high peak offensively when he's on the positive end, playing right field and playing really good defense, I think having that early is actually something of value for the Indians. It gives them some upside at the position to cover what they're losing offensively early. So Chisenhall, he's going to be fine. He's someone where I think we've talked about this. The Indians kind of entered this offseason with a studs and duds roster, and you're just hoping you can cross off positions that are in the dud category. And I think Chisenhall makes the position not a dud. I think he makes it okay. And as long as I'm not worried about right field, I'm happy. I'm not excited about it, but I'm not worried about it.
Well, and a conversation with Chisenhall phrased in that manner sounds awesome if Michael Brantley is healthy, and I'll leave it at that. Here's what I will say about this. with Brantley and say Naquin, Cowgill, Venable, take your pick of which guys end up playing in this outfield. Chisenhall in right, Brantley in left, a center fielder that's serviceable. Here's what I like about this outfield. In the end, better than I liked the Indians outfield makeup last year. You mentioned the toolbox of one Terry Francona. I feel like the toolbox for the Indians outfield is primed to be much better put together than it was last year, where we had, the Jerry Sands experiment and the Mike Aviles experiment, and we had guys that just didn't fit. If the worst guy we're talking about in the outfield is Jose Ramirez, I think we're doing okay, especially once Brantley comes back. So would you not agree, Mike? The one maybe blue spot in the sky in all of this is that if Brantley comes back healthy and Lonnie Chisenhall can manage the 2-month/2-month balance as opposed to the normal 3-week/3-month balance of good to bad, if he can average that all out and play good defense, don't you think that the pieces that were acquired by Antonetti and Chernoff are better suited to a good outfield than the pieces that were assembled last year?
This is such a great point. I think I think that 160 plus games going to Mike Aviles, Michael Bourne, and Jerry Sands is not good. I think that those 160 games are going to be given to better players. So I think in the end that is an upgrade. Maybe we've diminished that too much and ignored, the fact that center field and Aviles and Sands in right field were giant gaping holes for the Indians last year that cost. And
well, let's not forget Michael Bourne led off last year at the beginning of. I mean, how bad was the team based solely on the fact that he was leading off? This year we're getting, and I don't mean to get irate about this, but you want to start off a month badly, have Michael Bourne up there. And I mean, and this is I'm offended by Michael Bourne. Let's just get it out there. Now we've got the potential of having Carlos Santana leading off, or worst case scenario, Kipnis leading off. And again, we're getting away from the outfield here, but this is addition by subtraction. I've been listening to whining and bitching and moaning on Twitter for the past 24 hours about how the lineup it's going to get worse. It's been going down from year to year to year based on wins and losses. Oh, by the way, the first year they won 10 games in September, because that's normal. They've regressed the past 3 years. Yeah, I think the +5, -5 thing that most people take into account would say they've been about the same. They're starting off with a better mix of players, right? And I don't mean to get pissy, Mike, and I didn't mean to talk over you there, but Jesus Christ. I mean, this is getting kind of old.
No, you really should get pissed because, look, the Indians gave about 1,000 plate appearances to Mike Aviles, Nick Swisher, Michael Bourne, and more if you include Brandon Moss, who really sucked last year. So I think if you think that the Indians haven't improved, then I think you're clearly wrong, and that's fine. We can take that up somewhere else. The other thing is, you're right. Michael Bourne was a total suck at the top of the lineup for 40 or 50 games last year. He had a 300 OBP. They're going to have somebody up there with at least a 350 OBP, which means that
or better. And Lindor's there too. I mean, the whole front end of the lineup looks a lot different offensively. So not only, I mean, come on.
Yeah, the top side is going to be so much better. And people kind of I guess it seems small, but every 20 at bats, if a guy gets on base 1 or 2 more times at the top of the order, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. If in 20 at bats, you're seeing a substantive difference in how frequently people get on base, that means you had a big problem last year and you fixed it this year. And I think we're going to see that. I think the top half of the order is going to look better with any of these guys,
we can talk Santana, when we talk DH, which we'll get to soon. But, if they move Santana up or down, the middle of the lineup should look a little bit better in that it can, with run scoring potential, taking the walks and moving them to a better spot. I mean, I think we both agree having him at the top of the lineup would be perfect. You put him at the top of the lineup, Lindor, or if he struggles a little bit, somebody else at 2. You got Kipnis at 3. You got Napoli at 4, maybe even Gomes. It just seems like a tasty front end. The bottom of the lineup may suck for a while, but once Brantley comes back, this starts getting really kind of interesting, don't you think?
It really does. So it's so much deeper. A healthy Gomes, an addition of Napoli instead of like Sands and Murphy and Rayburn at bats. And I mean, Rayburn was good last year, but I think Napoli over.
Just say that over again. Just say that over again. It's come on.
It's a significant upgrade. And Moss sucked. Like I thought Brandon Moss would be a good fit. And I think Napoli can be a lot better than him offensively. I think Gomes is going to be hitting somebody really solid. Somebody who's a better than league average hitter is going to be hitting 6th or maybe 7th on this Indians team, probably 6th. And that's good. That wasn't happening last year. And in the early part of the season, we saw some really bad performances. Ramirez really struggled offensively, and I think there were issues because the Indians had him in a really tough situation. I buy into his offense, but for the first 2 months, 3 months maybe, center field and shortstop were giving us horrific offensive production, and third base sucked offensively the entire season, and I think it'll be better too. This is a much deeper lineup at the start of the season than it was last year, and that's missing Brantley, let alone when Brantley comes back. So, they're not regressing. Whatever. What a waste of time. I don't have any time for that.
Well, and I'll just say this, and I'll kind of end it there. The people who bitch and moan about Francisco Lindor coming up in June because he's awesome are the same ones saying, well, they're putting too much weight on Francisco Lindor this year, and he's going to regress. Well, sorry, you can't really say both things, because if you're pissed that they held on to him until June, and now you're pissed because they're giving him too much, doesn't fit, people. Doesn't fit. We'll end it there. That's our outfield prognostication. I suspect we'll be coming back to this soon. We got to wait and see how this shakes out a little bit and see some games played to see what the Indians are thinking. Who knows? Maybe they'll just roll out Jose Ramirez in center and just call it a day. One can only dream. We didn't even talk about
the Thunderstick.
We did. Well, as I think we all know, that's a podcast in and of itself. And we certainly can't talk about the Thunderstick without the Gil DeWalters as part of the show. So coming soon to a podcast near you. With that said, we're about to wrap up fielding positions. We are going to be heading into the rotation. I think we'll close up shop with the starting rotation. So we've got DH, bullpen, and then the starting rotation coming up in the next couple of days. We may pound these out this week as we head into actual baseball starting on Tuesday. So with that said, any final thoughts, Mike? Anything you'd like to plug coming up? Anything you'd like to plug in the past? Anything you'd just like to say to get off your chest? And I just realized maybe that was a loaded gun.
Yeah, you don't want to do that to me. I have way too many. No, I wrote a piece on Tyler Naquin that I think is something that is worth reading. I think it gives. I think I researched and talked to a couple of different people that I think give really good insight on what you can expect from Tyler Naquin, the outfielder, and I think talked about him offensively too. So definitely read that. And I'm hoping to have a piece on Lindor out this week that kind of talks about how real his power is. And I think his power is a little more real than everybody wants you to think it is. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Listen to all of our podcasts. If you made it this far in this one, that means you should listen to all the rest, because we're at least, more insightful in the other ones than this one, hopefully, or at least I am. But listen to those and keep, plug, if you could check out our iTunes, that'd be fantastic. Give us a rating so our ratings can start posting. That'd be even better.
Well, there you go. Make sure you read that piece. I have a quote in it, which makes it the best piece ever written by Michael Hattery. Check out check. When you're quoting me, that means you're stretching, my friend. No, I'm just kidding. It is a fantastic piece on Naquin, and one I think that's rooted in actual concrete numbers, as opposed to Naquin's going to be a star because he was in the top 15 of the first round. I digress. Go to iTunes, type in "Everybody Hates Cleveland" into the search engine. Subscribe to us if you can. If you have, if you have an iPhone, if you have Android, get on to you, whatever you use for podcasts, subscribe to us so you can download these excessively insightful podcasts. We will be having multitudes of different guests on over the coming weeks. And of course, we are tied in together with the Tribe Time Now network. So we'll be talking to a lot of those guys as well and gals. So make sure you check that out. Mike's going to have a show of his own, and it's going to start popping up here and there. I'm going to have a show on my own that's going to start popping up here and there. So if there's anybody around that talks Indians baseball, we're likely going to be talking to them, at them. We also have a lot of pop culture stuff about to come up. We're going to be reviewing sports movies coming up. We're going to be talking Browns and Cavs coming up. Don't forget, Namina was on with Mike Hattery last week talking about possibility of Joe Johnson coming. And of course, I led that he was coming to the Cavs and sent people to listen. And of course, he signed with the team that's going to get bounced out of the playoffs quickly. Smart move there, Joe Johnson, you loser. That said, for insightful thoughts and comments like that, give us a 5-star rating, give us a 4-star rating, give us a 1-star rating. I don't care. Yeah, I do. Give us a 5-star rating. Don't give us a 1-star. But, we'll read what you got up. And like I said, we'd love to get as many as we possibly can. I don't have any idea how it helps us, but it couldn't hurt, right? So follow us, subscribe to us, check out our site. We'll have lots of stuff coming up. That said, that's it. Go Cleveland, and we'll see you probably tomorrow with the bullpen.